Okay. Carol,
Yeah.
are we good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good to go, Mary. Yeah.
Okay. Right, thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Harpenden Town Council and the meeting of the Corporate Policy and Finance Committee on Wednesday, the 9th of September. This meeting will be conducted virtually. If we move on to the agenda, item 1 is apologies. Are there any apologies this evening?
No, Chair, everybody's present.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Right, declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make any declarations of interest, whether they're pecuniary and or personal interests. Does anybody have any declaration of interest on this agenda? No? Okay, if we move on. The Chairman's report and urgent items. I have nothing to report except you may have heard on the news tonight that the government has limited meetings to 6 people, which means that the Park Hall will inevitably be closed again, because it's highly unlikely to be rented out for meetings of 6 people or less. And we'll have the consequent revenue interruption. If I could just check, Mr. Cheevers, is that correct?
So, Chair, I think the guidance on community spaces has literally been released in the last half an hour. So we're going to work our way through that in the morning. Now, there is some suggestion in there that where a community facility is COVID-19 secure, so where it meets the guidance that have previously been released, then there is the ability to have more than 6 people within that community facility at that time. But we need to clarify whether that means, for example, if we had a class of 12, if they were to be split into 2 groups of 6 at different ends of the hall, whether that would be satisfactory or not. So we're going to have to work through that in the next 24 hours. Unfortunately, we've just reopened Park Hall, and things have been going well so far this week. So we'll have to look at the guidance and then react accordingly.
Okay, the government has said that things like restaurants can continue, restaurants, pubs, etc., can continue to open with proper distancing restrictions in place. So it may be possible. The other thing they've said is that they want to have, I don't know, COVID monitors, people who visit public areas and monitor whether the distancing rules are being observed. So that may be something that the Town Council will be asked to contribute to, but I'm sure you'll put out information at the appropriate time. Okay, moving on. Are there any public questions in accordance with Standard Order 22?
There's none received, Chair. I am really struggling to hear you, though.
Goodbye.
Yeah, you're very faint.
Okay. Let me try. Is that better?
Yeah, I think it seems to be. It might be slightly better when you lean forward.
Okay.
No, that might sound strange, but just looking at it, the sound does correlate to better when you're slightly closer.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Don't worry about it. I'm about to get a WYSIWYG screen, which has a microphone and stereo, so that should help. Okay. Next, the minutes of the previous Corporate Policy and Finance meeting on 11th of March. These have been circulated. Does anyone have any comments on those minutes? No? Melanie, do you have a...
No.
No, no, thank you. Okay, if nobody has any comments, we'll take them as a record of the meeting, and I will sign them at an appropriate time. There are no, item 6, there are no minutes of meetings referred to this committee, so we move straight on to officers' reports. The first officers' report is the forward planner and resolution tracker, which you'll find on page 5. We have been asked to note and approve, subject to any comments or amendments, the forward planner, and note the resolution tracker attached to Appendix B, and approve the removal of those resolutions marked complete. We'll take item 2.1.1 first. Does anyone have any comments or suggestions on the forward planner? Okay. So
I do.
Councillor Priggen, I think.
Sorry. Okay. Hello, Councillor.
I have my hand up. Yes, Jet, please. I had asked Carl this question, but we agreed that it was probably best dealt with during the meeting. I was just interested to understand what the transport and movement strategy, what that involves.
Yeah, Chair. So the transport and movement strategy was last looked at this committee in March this year. So actually, it was the last face-to-face meeting that the council had actually. And during that meeting, the committee considered a series of actions within that strategy that was looking at things like parking capacity, sustainable transport, sustainable travel, and items like that. At that time, as I say, it was approved just before lockdown, and we were due to go out and have a public meeting. I think you might remember about a week or so after, which had to get subsequently postponed. So the reason this is on the forward plan is that clearly that's been about 6 months now, crazily. And we wanted to bring that back to the next meeting of this committee in order just to revisit the draft and for the committee to have another run over it. But what I'll happily do after this meeting or tomorrow is send round that draft again, just so that you're kind of familiar with it again. And then it will be coming to the committee in November for discussion again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chevers. Councillor Priggen, any further queries?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. I think we can take it that we will note and approve item 2.1.1. If we move on to item 2.1.2, the resolution tracker, any comments or queries on that? Councillor Drake.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, because a couple of the projects have obviously been pushed back by COVID-19. I just wonder if the town clerk could tell us what, if anything, is being done on plastic free at the moment. And secondly, the comment that the littering project is in progress but delayed. And just wonder again if any actions have been possible in that period, and whether there's anything intended, given the fact obviously we do not know at this stage when this current crisis might end.
Mr. Chevers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So if I take the second question first, so in terms of littering, there was a number of actions that the committee previously approved, and again, just before we went into lockdown. So the things we have been doing on littering, unfortunately, we've been doing an awful lot of comms around some of the problems that we've had in our open spaces whilst people have been at home. So the actions we have taken forward are particularly ones around new signage, linking into some national campaigns. So those are partly linked to the campaigns we agreed, but actually are also in reaction to some of the kind of, I would describe as probably poor behaviour that we've seen in the last few months. So we will be looking at picking that comms campaign back up in the autumn, so closer to Christmas. Once we kind of, now we're over some of the, now we're working back to close to what was normal. So we'll pick up those actions again in there, because some of them are actually about engagement with schools and bringing together like community champions. But clearly, because we've had the issues around social distancing, they've not been taken forward. So that'll get picked up very soon. In terms of Plastic Free Harpenden, the majority of our actions there were about our events actually. So the good news is we've got a very clear plan now, we think, as to how we would implement or move towards plastic-free events. But again, because we haven't run any, we haven't been able to test it as yet. So I think the point is probably summer carnival next year. It's scary to think too far ahead to that. that will be the first big event where you'll see a big shift away from the use of plastic, single use of plastic. The things we have done, we introduced again just before lockdown, was there a number of changes to Park Hall. So we now provide certain cutlery and certain plates, bowls, glasses, things like that, to avoid people having to come in with paper plates and plastic cutlery and other things like that perhaps are not best placed from a sustainability point of view. So we've done some things, but where they really relate to kind of engaging with people or physical things happening like events, clearly they've been delayed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cheevers. I think you will all have heard that the Christmas Carnival, we will be unable to take that forward. I think the second point to make is that if we have an Indian autumn, if in September, early October, we suddenly have a warm period, we now have the ability to break up the groups that have been forming on the Common and on Bradford Springs. And some of those groups are the ones who have been doing the heavy littering. So I think that's, that will be helpful. Okay, any other comments on the resolution tracker or questions? No? Okay, can I ask that we note the resolution tracker? Do I have agreement? Okay, thank you. So both items are noted. And we move on to agenda item 7.2, which is on page, one moment, 7.2 on page 11. Right, there we're just asked to note the budgetary control figures for 2020, 2021. I will start off by commenting on probably the thing which is most obvious, which is the drop in revenue, and ask Mr. Cheevers if he thinks that's a fair reflection of what's going to happen, or should we be thinking about rebudgeting at any point?
So Chair, if it's all right, I'll pass to Dan for that one.
That's the events. It's the commercial income, yeah, and the events. So it looks as though we won't be having any events anytime soon, and the commercial income is going to be impacted. So, Mr. Williams, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you. So the commercial income will be reviewed at council at the end of the month. So I'm going through the process of reviewing that in a minute. I think it's fair to say that there's some ups and some downs in the commercial income, but certainly the recommendation in that report won't be to change the budget because the situation is still so volatile. Because when I was reviewing things this morning, where Park Hall's looking great and hirers are using the facility and very keen to use it, things change as of tomorrow, then we're looking to review again. So the report at the end of the month to council certainly won't be to recommend any changes to the budget. It will just be to highlight to members this is where we're forecasting at the current point.
Okay.
And as part of that, there'll be things like the events budget that may be able to be reduced as a result of your events, and there's a few grants that we can potentially claim for that are still outstanding. So hopefully we'll be able to clarify that position at the end of the month.
Okay. The other thing in terms of grants, and this I think, I'm not sure if it's Mr. Williams or Mr. Cheevers, the District Council was given a large sum of money to facilitate changes on the High Street. The agreement was that would be distributed to the parishes who were actually doing this work. The District Council is not doing it, and Harpenden and the Town Council is doing it. Has that actually happened? Have they distributed the funds?
Yeah, so Chair, I'll pick that one up. So we've been allocated just over £20,000 as a percentage of the kind of roughly in line with our population. So far, we've incurred costs of around about £7,000 of that. And we've also set out an action plan of items that will see us spend the remaining of that £20,000. The caveat to it is it's retrospective funding, so it's not guaranteed, and that's retrospective, and that's not guaranteed by the district, because the districts are the same as us, they have to apply for it. It's actually a European fund, and so we have had to put an action plan together in order to say what would we use our allocation for. That's been accepted, and so we now every quarter we have to make a claim against that. So the good news so far is that we've incurred about £7,000 of costs that will be claimed back. So in terms of our budgetary control, that's an additional favourable variance that we'll see. And then of course any other additional spend will just be kind of balanced off. But it does come with the caveat that it is retrospective and not guaranteed. But we've met all the criteria that is required, including things like the way you have to communicate what you're doing and the types of logos that you have to put on the items that you buy and things like that. So that's a positive. The other grant that we're unlocking that Dan mentioned is the government's discretionary grant fund, which originally wasn't available or open to town and parish councils, but has more recently been opened up. So that is another £10,000 that we should get. That is distributed by the district, but we should get that. And again, that £10,000 isn't currently reflected in that budgetary control. So that's another positive. So where Dan talks about some ups, some downs, those are the things that they're going to help us as we move into the winter, particularly if Park Hall remains closed or the Liddicote car park doesn't hit the sorts of targets that it would have done previously.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chambers. Councillor Decore.
Can I just for my information, the 20,000 that you spoke about and the sum of spending, that relates to some of the spending that's promoted in the new banner that you was put up on Bowers Parade, I think in front of someone like W.H. Smith, I think just a couple of days ago. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's a number of things that we're putting on. So there's a big communications campaign and publicity. So we've tried to focus on if the restrictions are remaining in place, how can we make it more attractive? So one of the areas that we've purchased is a number of banners that go along those orange barriers, which I think make them look a lot better. It's also funding the hand sanitizer units that we've had set out across the town, and a number of other temporary structures that will be put up. So looking at working with the county, who have identified that this is going to continue for some time. So where we want to try and make it more attractive, we're trying to push them to replace barriers with planters and other things. Because as I say, if it remains in place, then I think we would rather it be attractive rather than the orange barriers that we've seen.
Great, thank you. And then just to clarify, in answer to the Chair's question to you about whether the St Albans District Council had released the monies to the parishes, the answer you've given in summary is yes.
Yeah, so they've applied a formula that has seen us get just over £20,000.
Great, thank you very much.
Right, and one of the things I'd like to say is a congratulations to the officers over this very difficult time. They've actually been doing an exceptionally good job in their efforts on the high street and in keeping our green spaces looking good and litter free. So I'd like to thank them for the what I know has been a very difficult at times job. So are there any other questions on budgetary control? No? Okay, then I think we can, the recommendation is we note the report. Can I see a show of hands, please? Yep, okay, that's agreed, thank you. Moving on to 7.3, which is the first look at the 2021-22 budget. I think most members of this committee were present when we did this last year, so we'll be aware that at this stage we're just putting in some of the parameters like likely rates of inflation, etc., which will be applied to actually working the budget out. Can I ask if there are any queries or comments on the report? Councillor Decore.
Yes, so firstly on page 17, the assumption on salaries, this is 53.1 of a 3% increase. I just thought that was somewhat high in the current circumstances. I don't know that anyone in the private sector who's expecting a pay rise at all this year. I mean, so I know it's impossible to say, but it seems to me to be somewhat unrealistic to suggest that a 3% increase is the base case.
Councillor Court, this is done in line with nationally agreed rates. It's not something that's agreed, happens in town council. The 3% is, and I will check with Mr. Williams. The figure quoted is usually the percentage which is being discussed coming out of the national negotiations. Is that correct, Mr. Williams?
Yeah, so at the minute, I'm not sure that the negotiations have started yet, but with the 2.75% that's already been agreed for this year that you'll see later on in the pack, I felt it was most prudent at this time to go with 3%.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Cheevers?
Yeah, sorry, can I just add to that? Because I think it's probably useful just to also clarify that where we're part of this national agreement, you know, you're quite right, we don't have any, whatever's agreed nationally, we have to implement. But interestingly, the approach that's taken this year between the employer side and the employee side was that the employee side through the unions set a request of 10%. So the 2.75 that we've got this year, you know, has come down from the union's request of 10%. As I understand it, and as I've seen so far, I think the unions are again on the employee side are going to be pitching for a similar amount. So it's important for us to set a realistic target, which I think we think at the moment is 3%. As you see, 2.75 this year has meant that we're in a slightly positive position of about £1,300 where we've over budgeted, but better to be slightly up than down on that, I think.
Okay, Councillor Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair. Just the general comment, we're going to accept what's in this draft report, but my reaction is going forward, we may in extremis have to reconsider whether the town council can really have the electors bear a 3% increase or any other increase, particularly bearing in mind, I suspect 5.3.2, the pension contributions, that figure of 22.15% is now historically out of date, bearing in mind what's happened to the yields on government bonds. I suspect come the next triennial valuation, there'll be a very large shortfall, which will have to have that rate of contribution increased. All I'm saying is, in extremis, we may have to look at headcount in the longer term to keep the numbers in some reasonable level for the ratepayers, the council taxpayers. That's my observation, I'm afraid.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interject on that, just to say that if there's any further discussion along those lines, you're going to need to take that under confidential business, because you're talking about employee terms and conditions, which is not allowed to be in the public domain. So just to make that comment now, if there's any further discussion that's required on that, then that should be resolved to move into exempt at the end.
Councillor Turnbull, we're always kind of balancing impact on taxpayer with impact on services expected by taxpayers, and that is a discussion that will no doubt be held at the next stage of looking at the plan. So we can do that. We can do that on the basis of perhaps firmer figures at the next stage.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. As long as the point's noted, I don't want to be political. I merely am being concerned about what the future might what might arise in the future. Thank you.
I think it's good to note, but it's a debate that we should hold.
Okay.
At a later stage. Councillor Ducote, you have a third point.
It was my next point. My next point is on 6.4. I don't know if any other councillors want to speak about something before that.
Anybody else? No. Okay. Back to you, Councillor Ducote.
I'll go into 6.4, and I accept this may be a matter of phrasing, which is why I'm raising it, but in 6.4, second sentence about the tax base, any increase in this, the tax base will provide additional headroom for an increase in the budget. And I don't understand that as it is written, because when we have new properties in the area, new households, I don't understand that it puts our costs up at all. We're still cutting the same commons. We're not, for example, involved in bins, because that's an SADC responsibility. So there's no extra cost. It's not additional headroom for an increase in the budget. It may help us cut a deficit, but I think that's quite important philosophically.
Councillor Decourt, if we have a balanced budget and we have an increase in presets because of an increase in the number of houses, we then have the choice. We can either do more, which is we're always under pressure to do, or we can cut everybody else's preset by a fraction. I think that's all it's saying. All it's saying to you is if there's an extra 100 houses, it gives us an extra 7,000 plus pounds. That's all.
Well, sorry, it really takes me back to Councillor Turnbull's point. At the moment, it's one way. It's assuming that should we get this money, we will look towards increasing the budget, and I don't know why we would do that. If we need to say it will provide us with further information to allow us to make a decision, then we should put that in.
Well, I'm sure it would enable us to increase the budget, or it would enable us to reduce the preset. Maybe that could be added. Councillor Drake.
Yeah, just to refer to two of the comments that were made. The first one obviously is the unknown of the COVID-19 effect on commercial income into next year, which is really quite a significant amount of the overall budget, and also maintaining sufficient reserves, which is also commented on later on. And one of the things we may well, it seems to me, have to bear in mind is what level of reserve do we need to hold at the end of the budget period, and maybe we will need to make sure we have a bit of a cushion there in case any commercial assumptions do not prove to be valid.
And I think that's an excellent point, Councillor Drake. And if I would just like to add to it, we have no idea how long the COVID crisis will last. It could be another 2 years. We could have impact on our commercial income for the foreseeable. And at the moment, we have reduced our general reserve slightly, but we still have 4.5 months general reserve. There is going to be a debate about this, about whether we want to touch those reserves, because they may be what sees us through the 2022-23 scenario. So we have to think very, very carefully. Councillor Butterworth.
Thank you, Chair. Just on 6.4, Councillor Decourt's point, and I suspect it's more the wording here, which is, I'm sure, is not intended for legal drafting. So long as the budget's in deficit and actually we're dipping into the reserves, then perhaps what that sentence in 6.4 is saying is that additional houses would provide headroom for an increase in the budget before we dip into the reserve, because the sensible thing to do would be actually to minimise the amount we're drawing down on reserves, and perhaps that's a much better way of understanding 6.4. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Butterworth. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Not on that point,
Decourt.
or the next one. It was on capital receipts, which was 7.1, which is on the same page. There's a reference of, it's the last sentence. An initial plan of how these funds will be spent was last discussed at full council. Well, it was actually last discussed, I believe, on the rearranged meeting on the 27th or 28th of July. I can't remember which date it was, because there was a further discussion about reds and ambers. So I just want the general public who might see this to realise that we have actually been progressing that beyond the 18th of May, and we need to change that to put it into whatever that date was in July, in my opinion.
Okay. If this could be updated, thank you very much for that, Councillor Decourt. Well spotted. Right. Anything else? No? Okay, I think we're just being asked to, if we go through the recommendations, the first recommendation is to note the budget timetable and process for 2021-22 as set out in paragraph 4.1. Can we agree that? Can I show of hands that we note that? Thank you. If we agree the budget and inflation assumptions as set out in 5.2. Can we agree that? Thank you. And 2.1.3, approve the guidelines for standing committees to review their budgets and any growth items as outlined in paragraph 5.7. I see a show of hands on that. That's just the two committees and what falls under it. And section 2.4, approve the level of general reserves as set out in section 9. Can we? Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to agenda item 7.4, which is on page 23. We are looking here at the merit awards, which are awarded to people who've done something outstanding for Harpenden, really, in the year. And we're being asked to approve the process by which the merit award nominations are handled. First of all, are there any questions about this report? I think everybody's been through at least one cycle of merit awards, so you're all familiar with the process. Any questions? No? Well, can I move on then to approving the recommendations? The first one is that a working party comprising the town mayor, the deputy town mayor and the past town mayor is set up to consider the nominations received from members under the current crisis. And could I have a vote on that, please? Thank you. That the nominations are put forward to the working party for the award by Friday, the 13th of November. Can I have a vote, please? Thank you. And the working party determining the awards reports to council on the 25th of January. This means that the working party will need to meet in the week commencing Monday, the 4th of January. Can we agree that, please? Thank you. I think that's agreed. If we move on to 7.5, the future timeline for the approval of accounts, which is you will find on page 27 of your pack. The purpose of this report is to consider the comments made in the 2019-20 internal audit report and the timeline for future year-end accounts report. You have to remember we had a very good audit again, and having gone through the comments, they were fairly. There were more small things missed, and I think there was something where £2 item was put in the wrong place, but pretty much it was a good audit. The comments that the officers have made you'll find on page 3.2. Are there any comments on this or questions about it? Councillor Butterworth.
Thank you, Chair. It partly goes back to my thinking at the 28th July meeting, and I freely admit that my background is sort of the commercial world rather than local government, and therefore I may be totally misguided in my questions. But looking at it, as I say, with my background in terms of sort of general governance principles, I'm a little surprised, and it's in the criticism, it's just where I come from. I'm surprised that the accounts are not run through the accounts committee, given its name, and that the AGR as well as the budget control figures, are not run through this committee. Now, I don't wish to apply any criticism whatsoever of officers or any suspicion. I'm purely approaching this as an issue of principle. Given my background, I'm fully prepared to be told that I'm totally misguided here. But I thought I would raise the point. The chair is gesticulating. Have I not
colleagues,
been heard?
I'm afraid I've lost the sound on this.
Mary, can you hear me?
Let me switch this.
Mary, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, have you asked your question? I lost the sound there halfway
I have
through.
asked my question, but it seems now that I have to repeat it. Is that right?
No, don't ask. Mr. Cheevers, if you could respond.
Dan, do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, thank you. So the normal principles are that the budgetary control is seen and reviewed by a committee, but the full statement of accounts and the AGAR and things like that aren't seen by committee until they're signed off. They're not normally reviewed by any sort of scrutiny committee, if you like. The next time that you'll see them will be when they're completely signed off and agreed by our external auditors.
Most of that deals with one of my points, but not the other point. Shall I reiterate it, Chair?
Sorry.
Yeah, if you reiterate the other point, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. My other point is, given the title of Accounts and Risk Subcommittee, I was surprised, given my background, that it doesn't have sight of even figures which this committee sees, because on general principle, I would expect that Accounts Committee to see all the accounts figures before they come to this committee, and that would include the AGAR. Now, I have looked at the terms of reference, both of this committee and the Accounts Committee, and those do not require what I'm asking for. So I'm not saying we're not doing what we say we should do. I'm simply asking whether we should be doing more in terms of general governance principles, and whether, and here I don't know the answer, whether councillors have a responsibility for something which they don't have sight of now, and I don't know whether they do have that responsibility or not. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, the first thing we'll do, Councillor Birchwood, is we'll ask Mr. Cheevers what normally happens in parish councils.
So, Chair, two reflections on this really. First of all, this committee has delegated responsibilities from council, and the subcommittee has delegated responsibilities from this committee. So the reason I say that is it's essentially this committee can delegate anything it wishes to the subcommittee. So if it decided that it thought that it might be reasonable for things to be reviewed at the subcommittee level, then this committee could look to do that. My only point with that would be two things really. First of all, that any actions like that are put forward don't add or actually do add value to the process. So that, you know, a subcommittee looks at something that the committee has to then look at, and then council has to look at. So it's about adding value. And the second thing, that it remains, or there remains flexibility in the approach. For example, should we have a situation like COVID-19 again, where actually it would have been impossible given the situation we were in, or very difficult given the situation at the time, to perhaps take things through certain committees if they aren't meeting. So, you know, the committee has got the ability to ask the subcommittee to do more, but we just need to, I would just urge caution around making sure that that's adding value to the whole process and fits within the statutory timeline that we have to meet.
I think it's helpful to look at the history of why things have been delegated to subcommittees. On the whole, it's because there are items which are immensely detailed, and you know, you can get multiple 100-page reports. It's felt that if you delegate it to a smaller subcommittee, that subcommittee can then spend more time going through one of those detailed, and for example, a good example is the risk management in the council. The subcommittee can spend a lot more time going through all that detail before it comes to the main committee. And then on the main committee, there will be councillors who have a detailed knowledge of it, and they will be able to help their colleagues. I'm not sure if that's appropriate for this audit work. I think it would be the same information that would go to 3 levels, to a subcommittee, to this committee, and then to council. And that's when you start to ask, is that valuable? Mr. Cheevers, is that correct, or would the subcommittee get more information than we would see?
I mean, no committee would get more information than a different tier, so because it's all available. I mean, what you could say as a suggestion, if Councillor Butterworth, just thinking that, I know you obviously chair the subcommittee, and the subcommittee meets next week, I believe. Perhaps this committee could ask that subcommittee next week to consider whether a proposal as to whether this is, you know, something that should happen in future around the sites of the accounts. And that subcommittee then puts back a proposal to this committee in November for detailed consideration, perhaps.
Okay, Councillor Butterworth, are you happy with that?
Thank you, Chair and Town Clerk. Yes, I would find that very helpful indeed. And yes, of course,
Okay.
any discussion at the subcommittee would come back to this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. The recommendation, can I see
Councillor Farmer.
Councillor Farmer?
I was only going to say, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm having enormous trouble hearing again.
Is it me?
Yes. So I think you need to really speak into your microphone.
Yeah, I'll shout. Can you hear me now? Okay. The committee is being asked to note the officer comments relating to the audit report. Can I see a show of hands, please? Do we agree that we will note that? Yeah. Okay, thank you all. And moving on to item 7.6, the speed management strategy consultation, which I'm sure you all found thrilling in the extreme to read. That is on page 41. And we are being asked to consider the response to the Hearts County Council Speed Management Strategy and to approve the consultation responses, which are set out in paragraph 3.3. Anybody have any comments or suggested changes to the consultation responses? Councillor DeCourt?
Yeah, okay, well, I'll start. I mean, I don't like the way the draft response exists at the moment in 3 areas. Just as a background, I find the whole speed management strategy, I noticed you said, sort of ironically said it was thrilling. I think, which I know you meant ironically. I mean, part of the problem is it's so dull because it's so lax in any innovation. There's no attempt in it to address the post-COVID world. There's no attempt to address sustainable transport issues that the county council have committed to, district council, town council, our local MP, all of those are committed to. None of it's in there. And it's hugely contradictory. So it starts well on page 20 of their report, page 62 for us, about the introduction of 20-mile speed limits, provides a mechanism for encouraging the greater uptake of active travel, which I have absolutely no problem with. And so our first point on response, I'm more than happy with. Goes on the next page to talk about a very interesting place and movement category, picks up 2 areas which they define as P2M1 and P3M1, and talk about 20-mile-an-hour limits being very important for pedestrian and cycle movements. And then after that, in terms of the criteria, it just completely falls apart. Basically, in summary, it says people, you know, councils or individuals in certain streets, residents can request 20-mile-an-hour limit. there's a sort of suggestion that if cars are traveling too fast, then it can't be done. So you can't actually, there's no dynamic effect, as we'd say in economics, where if you're trying to affect change, if you actually make something a 20-mile-an-hour limit, you will force, you will allow, incentivize more pedestrians and cyclists onto those roads, and of course divert traffic away, which will of course slow that traffic down. It's a fundamental principle that works for the Dutch and the Danes extremely well. So it's in point 2, the point about the criteria. Yes, we agree with the revised criteria. I don't, that because I'm making my point on that. And later on, I'm not particularly happy about the membership of the group and the overall issue. But I don't know if anybody else wants to make comments about that at this point.
Okay, well, I'll come in with a comment at this point, Councillor Court, and then Councillor Priggen can comment. I must say I agree with you in one sense. I read this and I thought it's let's not change anything, let's not be too hasty, and let's not change much report. It would seem to me that there is enormous barriers in getting any changes in terms of speed limits around the county. And what this strategy does is, instead of trying to remove barriers to reducing speed, it possibly adds more. I don't know what colleagues feel about that. And I speak as somebody who's wanted 20 mile per hour speed limits in certain areas, particularly around schools, for some time.
Yep.
So that is offset by my knowledge, and having spoken to officers on this topic who deal with this topic day in, day out. The problem is that the British have a different approach to rules than perhaps our continental neighbours do, and they see speed limits more as a challenge than an instruction. And the officers have pointed out that the behavioural dynamics are perhaps different here, which means that the way in which traffic is managed has to be different also. So I just offer that to you without comment. We'll go on to Councillor Priggen and then Councillor Farmer.
Mute.
You're on mute.
You're muted, Melanie. Unmute.
Unmute.
You're not unmuted.
Sorry, my mouse wasn't working. I do apologise. I couldn't get to the unmute button. Thank you. I agree with Councillor de Court. I would even go further in saying I wasn't quite sure on that first point what the report was saying in terms of, you know, can we, does this in effect say that if you can only get a lower speed limit if people are already driving that anyway or not? I couldn't quite grasp that. I was wondering if there is any merit in exploring whether we can get an officer or somebody from County Council to come and talk to us about this. I think they need to see us, and I think they need to really understand our concerns and our wishes, the way we would feel is right for Harpenden. We are the most local in this. What do people think about that?
Councillor Priggen, there are, the county is a large place, and it would be difficult for officers to travel to the different areas. I think as a first step, we have to, if we have concerns, we have to reflect them in the response that we give to the speed strategy. And so we have to be very specific about the responses we give. Yeah. Councillor Farmer.
Well, I was going to comment because I haven't got any wording. I mean, we've seen this before, that when you get some of these consultations where the response is framed within a series of questions which give you, if you like, finite scope, and some of us might say designed to get the answer they want. Yeah. But don't quote me on that. But I know in the past where we have had consultations, one of the ways we've sort of got round that is to add on or have an introduction to say that, you know, note the 5 questions, but would wish to comment further and then add perhaps comments on that don't feel that as it stands, it really fully addresses the issue properly of bringing in speed limits and how they assess them, or something to that effect. I think one can put in a response that's got a caveat expressing our concerns.
I think that's an excellent idea, Councillor Farmer, and we'll take a vote on whether other people are concerned about this at the end of this discussion. Is there anybody else? Would anybody else like to comment on this? Councillor Drake.
Yes, I was going to say that I like Councillor DeCourt. I actually think this is potentially an opportunity missed. However, obviously the officers in drafting these responses have done exactly what they were asked to do, and not rewrite the HCC report, but to respond to the questions that were made. I think one of the main points is the last one, where should there be a wider membership of the review body. And I think that that would actually go a long way to resolving these types of problems, because I think this is a very technical report written by people who have a very technical interest and don't look at it in a wider round. And therefore, I think that would be part of the way of addressing we could have a wider representation on the committee. What that is, I have no firm views on. I also think the suggestion that's made by Councillor Farmer would also go some way to at least moving this discussion forward.
So if we, Councillor Butterworth.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo points that have already been made, but I was making them a slightly different way. This is a very long and very technical report. It's a very difficult read, and it's far too long and convoluted, really, for public consultation. If they're wanting people's ideas on a high-level strategy, they should have produced a 10-page document. And therefore, the only way we can sensibly respond is do our best with the specific answers. But as Councillor Farmer says, then write our own views in our own way. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor DeCourt.
I just want to add to what Councillor Drake said, and it would have been my second point, which was about the membership. The membership is self-supporting. The officers who write the report, as the chair said, are carrying out big actions that they've carried out for a long time. There's no sense of innovation. There's absolutely no representation for any sustainable transport groups on there. Now, there are a series of highly effective, important sustainable transport groups. I could name Sustrans or 20's Plenty, which is getting a lot of coverage in St Albans. Sustrans has been around for 20 years. And those sorts of bodies ought to be on their speed management group, because otherwise it becomes exactly what it says it is. A group that talks about speed limits being broken and how they might be dealt with without fundamentally changing the way transport works in Hertfordshire. So I'm very happy that we write that in, but I've made the suggestion of what sorts of people should be added to the membership of that group.
Just like to build on that, Councillor DeCourt. I'm very surprised at this speed management strategy, actually, because it almost conflicts with LTP4, because LTP4 is very much about a change in travel mode and moving people out of cars onto public transport, onto cycling, and onto walking. I expected this to be more supportive of LTP4, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be an extension of what's already been done, and actually making it more difficult to make changes rather than less. And perhaps officers could reflect back on the comments which have been made by councillors tonight and use that to formulate an introduction to or an additional commentary on the strategy when we give in our response. Do councillors agree that? Would they be happy for that to? Yeah.
So Chair, can I just
Unanimous.
Chair, can I just be clear as to what exactly you're asking officers to do?
Okay,
on
I'll
that?
tell you the points. One, the speed management strategy is not reflecting the intent and the policies, is not fully supportive and not reflective of the policies which were outlined in LTP4. Secondly, opportunities to be creative about how roads are shared and how non-car modes of transport are used have been missed in developing this strategy. Three, the lessons we have learned during the COVID crisis and the uptake, the increase in walking and cycling, which has been evident within Harpenden during it, yeah, shows that there is demand for alternative forms of transport, and that demand should be supported by making roads safer and looking very carefully at speed limits in residential environments, and that this has not been reflected in the strategy. Is that, Councillor Court and Councillor Priggen? Well, actually, everybody said this. Is that fair, and is that reflective of what you're looking for, Councillor Priggen?
In part, yes. The part that I'm missing is the lack of clarity that exists in my mind about what it is that exactly could drive a speed limit down. So whether it's purely based on the speed that's already there, the speed that people are already driving at, or whether that is something we have actually got scope to manage, because it does refer to that. And this goes back to my point. I think, as other people have commented, it's incredibly complicated and difficult to really get the key message, get messages out of this document. It's just not clear to me, which is why I suggested that we would have a presentation about it.
There is.
I would like to suggest that would be my choice, to suggest that they come and present to us about it. Yeah. If that's not possible, you're interrupting me, please. I was not finished. If that's not possible, I would just like to draw out the fact that there are the key points that they're trying to make aren't actually very clearly made to us, or they're not clear to me. What could drive a reduction in the speed limit, whether it's purely based on what speed people are already driving at, or whether there is scope for putting in supportive measures such as speed bumps and things, and then we could drive it down. And that to me is quite key to the speed management strategy.
I'd just like to say, Councillor Priggen, having read the strategy, it's pretty clear to me what drives a change in the speed. Changes are driven by either requests from groups of residents, requests from county councillors, or accidents at existing speed. They are reviewed in terms of the model which is set out in the strategy. What we're saying is that there should be another mechanism by which speeds are looked at, and that mechanism is somehow a democratic vote to change an area and to make an area more suitable for cycling and for mixed use movement. Yeah, and that's really what you're saying. Now, one of the things you may find, as we have found in Harpenden, is the last time we tried to make an area a 20 mile per hour area, the residents voted against. Yeah, people have very strong views, but when you actually take this vote to residents, you may find that residents don't share strong views about 20 mile an hour limits. It was last done in Southdown, and the residents voted against them. So, you know, partly we're not going to impose people's views. This needs to be a democratic process, and therefore it's driven by residents' wishes in different areas. Because if it isn't, I think what this strategy is saying is people will ignore it anyway. Councillor Decourt.
Yes, Chair, I'm always grateful for your historical insights, but there's been a massive change in this country, and therefore to refer back to people in the past voting against something doesn't necessarily look towards the future. I also think it's completely unacceptable for a society to say people won't stick to the rules. That's created a huge amount of our problem in our society in the last few months. So we need to not just accept that will be the case. You referenced that we had a different culture to the Netherlands. That's inaccurate. The Netherlands changed the law under pressure from child groups like Stop the Child Deaths, because they had exactly the same car-focused policy. And in the 1970s, they changed behaviour. And if you drive around in the Netherlands, you are not in fear of your life. And it's not because you're in a segregated cycle lane, it's because people obey the rules, because the society falls within it and they take actions all those places. So I would also like to add that, because you've spoken about the democratic process, and I totally accept the officers, the council officers are acting under instruction. That instruction comes from the political leaders of the county council. We have two relevant to us. I believe it's County Councillor Heritage, County Councillor Williams. And if we can't get the officers in, we must at least write to them with our concerns alongside any response we make to this survey, because I fear this survey, however we write it, will be just chucked in a pile with everything else. So I would like to put that forward as a suggestion that we put that forward to them as well. Even put it out in a press release or something.
Well, thank you, Councillor DeCourt. That is a good suggestion. I'd like to suggest that our response is copied to our local county councillors in Harpenden. Is everybody clear what we're going to see as an addendum? Does anybody have any comments? Mr. Cheevers.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So I just need to be absolutely clear as to which of the question responses you're discarding and not. So if we can run through them, I think I've captured the additional points that were spoken about before, which is that it's a complicated document. It's difficult to get the key messages from. It's not clear as to what can drive the reduction in speed measures. It doesn't reflect the policies of LTP4. It misses out on opportunities to be creative and how, particularly in how roads are shared. It's not picked up the lessons from around COVID-19 and alternatives. So I picked those up. And then if I can just clarify on the actual question responses that are in the report, so that you've then got a clear resolution as to what you're agreeing this evening. So first one, do you agree with the 5 core principles? I haven't heard anyone against those. So that reference to active travel is supported, particularly the link to the neighbourhood plan. I think that was okay. I think there is then a question mark about the response to the second one. So where at the moment we're saying we agree with the criteria, I think given the response that you put before, the additional things suggest that we won't be saying that now. Yeah. The third question, I've not really heard of any comment on that, so I would welcome your view on that. So at the moment that says, do we agree with the framework for setting the 30 to 70 limits? Do we want to discard that comment?
No, I think that one is. I can't see any problem with your response there. It needs to be evidence-led. It needs to be analytical.
Okay. And then the fourth question, the criteria around sighting camera technology. The only comment we've put in here from an officer point of view is something we see around the aesthetics, I guess, around the environment. We quite often see lots of street furniture plonked on the edge of the common. So we would, as officers, we would value that addition into there. So I think I'm seeing quite a lot of nods on that one.
I think we agree. Yeah.
And then on the membership point, I think we've made the point about community neighbourhood level presence. But I think there's also that point that's made around the sustainable transport groups to be present within there. I feel like everybody was supportive of that one.
I think you have to be careful on that one. I think you could end up with the more interest groups you introduce, the more it becomes a talking shop. I think some sustainable interest group representation. Yeah, not that every sustainable interest group across the county, and there's probably 50 of them, is represented, but certainly more representation from them. Okay,
so a representation. And then the last response, sorry, excuse my coffee. Do you agree, disagree with the proposed speed management strategy? I think I don't get a sense that we're agreeing with that. However, I think, are we still happy to make that last point that this shouldn't be a piecemeal basis? We need to look at things on a holistic point of view.
I think so. The other thing is, I mean, that may be the opportunity to put in the general points which we made. That there's maybe there's something that they're missing a trick basically, and that they should maybe take into account.
So, so Chair, on those bases, that would be the resolution that you'd be taking on those bases. Hopefully, I can repeat all that. Hopefully, if you're happy.
I think everybody's captured it. Do we agree? Can I see a show of hands, please? Okay, we have agreement. So I think we know what we're going to do on this one.
Thank you.
So thank you.
This isn't disagreement. It's just because Mr. Chief has listed all that. That's how we're going to respond. But I'm just confirming we're going to make a response to the survey on that basis and copy in our 2 county councillors in Harpenden.
I think we would anyway, Councillor de Court. We normally do.
Yeah, Chair. Can what I would suggest, I think, in this circumstance, given I don't think giving some of those responses don't necessarily respond to the questions. So what I would suggest is that a letter is, I present this in letter form and submit it into the consultation, and copy that letter also into the county councillors, because otherwise it might be, we might lose our message if I'm trying to fit different bits into different questions. Okay. If that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you. Right, move on. Item 7.7 on page 143. I have a question about this, Mr. Cheevers. Is that, are we satisfied that the figures which we've been sent say St Albans, they're headed St Albans requests, are these just the Harpenden postcode? Are you satisfied that they are just the Harpenden postcode? Because we have had issues in the past with information.
Yeah, Chair, I'm satisfied. So one of the follow-up questions that we've asked in advance of this is just to get the breakdown by ward in Harpenden. So
yeah, that would be good, because that we normally get that, and that's what worried me, because we didn't get it. I thought, what's going on?
Yeah, so Chair, just to outline that. So of the 76, 32 were from Harpenden East, 17 each from North and West, and 10 from South. Now, obviously, the way they've been working over the last 6 months has been significantly different, and so a high driving through the telephone lines rather than face to face. But we're certainly satisfied that the figures that we put forward there do reflect Harpenden.
Okay.
Harpenden clients.
Okay. Any questions? I'll just make a general point. Initial indications in terms of people coming forward to me in Harpenden are that there are going to be significant issues, or there are going to be more issues coming forward over the next 3 or 4 months. Maybe that's something, Mr. Cheevers, you can discuss with Citizens Advice, because I think they're going to start getting a peak of problems here.
Yeah, so Chair, I mean, we continue to have conversations with Citizens Advice and ask them to notify us of any key trends, in particular where a trend changes. So, for example, one of the key increases that we've seen in the statistics in the last 6 months is people coming and having issues around relationships, which, when we think about it, when we correlate that to the sorts of figures that we've seen around domestic abuse during lockdown, and the fact that people are closer together for longer, it kind of makes sense. So we always ask them to report trends to us, and as and when we get those, we disseminate that information to committee and to councillors.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that is noticeable is there's an uptick in people being made redundant, and that usually has consequential problems several months later. So I think that's something we all have to watch out for in our casework. Okay, any questions on Citizens Advice? No? Okay, then I would ask you to note the report. Thank you. Move on to section 7.8 on page 153, the safeguarding and lone working policy. Does anyone have any? Okay, we've been asked to approve both policies. We'll take safeguarding first. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? No? Okay. Move on. Well, can I ask you to approve the policy then with a show of hands? Thank you. The lone working policy, any queries or comments on that? No? Well, can I have a show of hands, please? To approve it? Okay, the lone working policy is duly approved. Section 7.9. This is about, it's on page 183, and it's about a request for improved audiovisual equipment at the town hall. And this is another impact of COVID. Our audiovisual equipment has never been that great. It was kind of, it wasn't done on the cheap, but it was a fairly low cost option we selected. The need for this audiovisual equipment is now growing as councillors work from home, and there is more and more things happening online. Looking forward, we may be moving into the situation where you have committee meetings where some people are actually in the meeting, others are dialing in from home. So there's going to be a mixed use needed. And with all of this, we're going to have to improve our audio-visual and our technology in the town hall. And this is a request to start that process with the AV equipment. Does anybody have any questions on the report? Councillor Butterworth, then Councillor Drake.
Yes, our equipment, existing equipment, probably is a bit aged, and it's right that we should update it. What I would like is confirmation that what is proposed here is good enough. It's not simply what we thought pre-COVID would do the job, but does it fully take into account the fact of COVID, the new situation, and the fact that it may go on for a very, very long time? In other words, effectively, are we spending enough?
Mr. Chief, you've probably never been asked that before, Mr. Chivers.
Yeah, so essentially what we would put forward is something that some kit that is fit for not only now but well into the future as well. Now it's fair to say that for these things, you know, if you had £50,000, you could do something that's all singing, all dancing. We think that £10,000 is more than reasonable to deliver what we need to. And in fact, actually, I think we will come in under budget on that. I would say to get the right technology to do what we need it to do.
Councillor Drake.
Yeah, just a brief point. My understanding was that pre-COVID, we had to have permission from the government to have virtual meetings for the council. Now, clearly, one of the things that might come out of the post-COVID world is that we move into the same world as commercial business, where you have some people present, as you said, and some people virtually. Have we any idea at all whether that's likely or whether we're likely to have to revert back to the original position?
Yeah, Chair, so essentially the legislation is in place at the moment until next May. There is I think there's a desire within the sector, in local authorities and local councils like town and parishes, that there is flexibility beyond May to hold virtual meetings. Now, what we're not saying is that everything should be virtual, but actually, you know, we should be open to be able to have hybrid meetings for lots of different reasons and for lots of positives. So we're hopeful, and the town and parish part of the sector is pushing quite hard for that, for the legislation to be permanent, to allow it.
I think one of the things you should always bear in mind is that it helps democracy. and that people who may not be able to travel for one reason or another to meetings can actually join in from their homes. So it gives you a more open democracy, which is good. Okay, any other comments? Councillor Turnbull, are you?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to ask the town clerk, and I'm assuming he has done this, but just for the record, if he's spending this money, no doubt, does he take advice from experts in the field, or does he see it in operation somewhere else, or is it similar equipment that might be used in the district council offices, just as a matter of interest? How do you go about selecting the provider of the equipment?
Yes, so it's a very good question. So we've got an IT provider called Cheeky Monkey, who are a St Albans-based company, and through them we take a lot of our IT advice. So they're a very sound local company that help us. So in the case of this, they provided us with a couple of audio-visual experts, I guess. Actually, both of them from Harpenden, funny enough. And so what we will do is we will bring those people in. We will set out what we're trying to achieve. And essentially, it will be a kind of a bit of a quotation tender back to get them to match up to what they can deliver against our aims, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Anything else? No? Okay, I'll move to the recommendation then. We're being asked to approve the release of 10k earmarked reserves as set out in section 4 to improve the AV equipment at the town hall. Can I see a show of hands, please? Okay. Yeah, I think that's unanimous. Right, thank you. The 7.10 Local Government Pay Award 2020-21. There is a report attached at page 187. And we're just being asked to note the pay award. Any queries, comments? No. Can I ask you then, colleagues, to note the pay award for 2020-2021? That's unanimous, thank you. And there is, I understand, no exempt business. So thank you all very much for your participation in the meeting tonight. We've got it in before 9 o'clock, which can only be good. And we look forward to seeing the response to the speed strategy from Mr. Cheevers and Mr. Williams. Thank you all. And I think we can say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Right.